Welcome everyone to our webinar, the CI Fellows webinar. If you are sure, you are wrong. And before I begin with our introductions, I want to mention that the CI Fellows is producing this webinar, and we are a nonprofit educational organization helping to promote the practice of competitive intelligence ethically and robustly. And we represent fellows from all over the world, and you can find out more on cifellows.com about our organization. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce, and by the way, I'm Cynthia Chankoria, the president of the Fellows. I've been doing this for so long now, I sometimes forget to introduce myself. But a person who doesn't need introduction, but I will, is our speaker, Mark Chussil. And he is the founder of Advanced Competitive Strategies. And many of you already know him because he's been working in competitive strategy for over 4 decades. He's conducting with business wargaming, writing computer-based strategy simulation models, and teaching competitive strategy and strategic thinking. And I love this. He adds on 6 continents. So we probably have one more to tackle. And Mark is also an author of a number of books. And articles. And so as you can see here, he's also published, he's the lead author of Strategy Analysis with Value War with Professor David Rapestein of the Wharton School. And he's also written for the Harvard Business Review, where you've probably seen many of his articles, and Competitive Intelligence magazine. And he he's also been an adjunct instructor at the University of Portland and gets lectured at many business schools. And I love that he can also run 1 billion simulations before breakfast. And one of the things that I do want to just point out is that he's got his latest book, The New Employee Manual, a no-holds-barred look at a corporate life. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mark so you can get us started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you. And I am going to remove my video from the screen because what happens when I present is that I start to gesture and I'm looking in all different directions, and it will be really distracting for you guys. So if I can find that place where I turn off my video, then I will do that. Ah, there it is. Good. Okay, now you're safe. Okay, so we're going to talk about if you are sure, you are wrong. Now, I mean no offense by that title. Rather, I mean to express camaraderie and support, since so many of our clients want definitive answers. I also do not mean to suggest that if you are not sure, that you are right. I intend only to show ways in which we can all be honestly more sure and less wrong. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about 4 reasons why businesses fail, what we learned from the Top Pricer tournament, which is a fairly massive simulation that I've been running for about 15 years, why It Depends is CI's best friend, and 3 ways to raise your odds of success. Now, at a superficial level, that's what we're going to talk about. Those items are not bad as superficial levels go, but we will also go deep into some of these things here. And I want to give special thanks to Ben Gilad, with whom I published the book that Cynthia just was so gracious to hold up for you guys, because he helped me by seeing, with a couple of words that really crystallized perfectly the distinction between one thing and another that we are going to face a few slides from now. So I've got a thought experiment for you. Think of a business that failed. Why did it fail? Now, I'm not talking about black swan events or gray rhino external shocks or anything like that. I mean a business that failed in the normal course of doing business. You probably thought of things like complacence or short-term orientation, or not paying attention to competitors, or not gathering competitive intelligence, not listening to customers, not taking new entrants seriously. The fact that it is so easy to come up with that list tells us something. And what it tells us is we know about those things. We know about those problems. And the people at the businesses that failed knew that list too. So how did they go wrong? The place we go next is we go a level down into cognitive bias. Now, talking about cognitive bias is very popular these days, and there's plenty to choose from because there are, according to a list on Wikipedia, something like 195 biases. Now, there's two things to note about cognitive bias. First one, no one thinks that he or she is biased. Or we admit that we are biased, but other people are more biased than we are. And that is actually a bias, and it has a name. It's called the bias blind spot. The second thing is that no one is in favor of bias, especially because if we could stamp out bias, everybody would agree with us. So we're just going to summarize that and say bias is bad. We can agree on that much. But the problem is we don't feel biased. What exactly does bias feel like? Blaming bias is a dead end anyway. Once I have concluded that your problem is cognitive bias, I am stuck until you get your mental acts together. That's not terribly constructive. So let's try a different approach. Another little thought experiment here. Imagine you are a 14th century European. Is it cognitive bias to believe that the sun orbits the earth? No. Of course it is wrong, but to a 14th century pre-Copernican European, it is not bias. It's what everybody knows. And that is a key problem. As Will Rogers, Mark Twain, and others are reputed to have said, it's what we know that ain't so. Now, businesses fail even though business people plan to succeed. Now, that is a fact. Actually, that's two facts. But the question is why? And the problem is in what we know that ain't so. Here's how that works. Let's take it down to the lowest possible level. Why do smart strategists choose bad strategies? And I mean choose. Nobody forces us to take those strategies. It's a choice. We choose bad strategies despite being the best educated, most data-rich, highest compensated executives and managers in the history of commerce. I think the answer to that question is actually very simple. Smart strategists don't choose bad strategies. No one says, I've got a good strategy and I've got a bad strategy. I think I'll take the bad strategy. If we think we don't have a good strategy, we keep looking until we think we have found one. But we know smart strategists have chosen bad strategies if for no other reason than that their companies have failed. So I think we have to think about this a little differently. Smart strategists choose bad strategies because they look like good strategies. We don't choose bad strategies on purpose, but we also don't choose them by accident. If bad decisions get made, and if the problem is not with strategists themselves as motivated, intelligent human beings, then the problem must be someplace else, as with decision-making. The problem with the decision-making is caused by the ways we think. It's caused by the tools we use because we use tools based on how we think, and it's caused by what we know that ain't so. It's caused by something we know about in medicine, false positives. When a bad strategy looks good, we have a false positive. We have plenty of evidence that there are false positives. And think of the Fortune 500 companies that have gone bankrupt. Think of the 75 to 90% of startups that fail. All of them thought that they were deciding wisely. We don't cure false positives by firing the doctor. We cure false positives by improving the test. We're going to talk more about false positives in a little while, but first we need a little bit more context. So we're going to talk about those 4 reasons why businesses fail, and this is going to be the longest part of the webinar. Now, there are some caveats here. First, these 4 are not the only reasons. Second, probably most important, I will oversimplify in some of my statements. So yeah, I'm going to oversimplify. It's okay. And finally, not all of these reasons apply to all businesses. But the thing is, as we're seeing in number one here, we all play games, and that's important. This is the Baker Library, the Bloomberg Center at the Baker Library at Harvard Business School. HBS was founded early in the 20th century for scientific management. That's what they called it. The MBA is a Master of Business Administration, not a Master of Business Leadership or Disruption. The deep down purpose of the business person is to keep the machine humming. The game managers play is managing. And here's how we score the game. Very simple. Make the numbers. That game is utterly simple, utterly clear, utterly common, utterly unconscious, and a way to frame every problem that you face. I'm not saying it's the proper way to frame it. I'm just saying that it is a way to frame every problem that you face. So what does it mean to make the numbers? It means hit the goals and Wall Street is happy. Stay within budgets and the boss and the board are happy. And people sincerely believe in make the numbers. Professional managers, MBAs like me, learn more than facts and techniques in school. We also learn culture. I do not mean Mozart and Leonardo. I mean a worldview, a paradigm of how business works. We learn about functions and organization charts and best practices and efficiency, no surprises. I'm not saying those things are wrong. I'm not saying that those things are right. I am just saying that they reflect the way that managers manage. We MBAs are trained and imbued with utter confidence, thanks to being certified as an MBA. We are trained to manage. The worst thing that you could do in an HBS classroom was not to have a plan of action. And I saw some strange things in HBS classes, like a student leading a horse into the classroom. Yes, you heard that right. I am not joking, and the horse was not amused. Anyway, managing is not bad, evil, or wrong. It is a job that must be done. Competitive strategists and CI professionals play a different game. We play a game called competing. Competing is not bad, evil, or wrong. It too is a job that must be done. But competing and managing are not the same thing. Put simplistically, competing is about investing and managing is about budgeting. Competing is about external, managing is about internal. Both are necessary, but they clash. And let me share an example of what that looks like. So in 1962, General Motors sold roughly twice as many cars in the United States as Ford, and Toyota sold essentially none. By 2016, GM, Ford, and Toyota were almost the same in how many cars that they were selling here. Does the decline for GM mean that GM failed? From the perspective of managing, if share is sliding, we must be doing something wrong. Heads must roll. If you cannot get the job done, I will get someone who can. Now think about it from the perspective of competing. GM's differentiation and other sources of competitive advantage declined as those competitors learned and built. GM should expect its performance to converge. Why would it be any other way? If the differentiation and competitive advantage was shrinking, then why should they perform at anything other than similar levels? We see it in airlines too. American, Delta, and United are about as close together in the Fortune 500 as three broad-shouldered passengers squeezed into coach. Managing and competing clash, and they judge differently. Let's get to number two here in our four reasons, the false positives. Now, false positives, by definition, cause us to misjudge and to mismanage because we think that something is going to work and we're wrong. False negatives also can cause us to misjudge and mismanage, but they are missed opportunities, and we don't even see those numbers because we don't do anything that we think is going to turn out negatively. So that's why we don't encounter the false negatives so much. This is John von Neumann. He's a mathematician who helped to develop the field of game theory. I highly recommend a book called Prisoner's Dilemma. It's by William Poundstone. It's about von Neumann. It's about game theory. It's about nuclear war. It is fascinating stuff. To me, our competitive strategy world is a game in the game theory von Neumann sense. And that game is unsolvable. That's part of what makes it a game. And therefore, the outcome is uncertain. That's why I say, if you are sure, you are wrong. It is unsolvable because what relevant others will do affects us. That's what makes them relevant to others. And we cannot know what they will do because they themselves do not know. When we're doing strategy for ourselves, we're trying to make a decision based on what we believe that they're going to do. But notice we haven't made our decision yet. So they couldn't know what we're doing because we haven't decided yet. They haven't decided yet either. They react to us, we react to them. They react to us, we react to them. Repeat. I do simulate such things, more on that later. But that unsolvability thing emphatically does not mean we are helpless. We can learn about the game and we can develop skill at playing the game. We just cannot be sure of the results. Think of it this way. Even if we know the odds of a card game, even if we have great skill at that card game, we do not know what cards we will be dealt. Now here, this is Wallace Shawn as a character called Vizzini in the fantastic movie, The Princess Bride. I always smile when I look at this picture. So for a taste of how complex simple games can get, Google poison scene Princess Bride, and you will get this guy in that scene. Go for the clip that's about 5 minutes long. It is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You will not be disappointed. But wait until the end of the webinar. Stay with me for the next while. Then go looking for him. So how can we tell a true positive from a false positive? Most people say, look at the results. Okay, fair enough. But frankly, I find that answer unsatisfactory. It's too much like Russian roulette. What we really want to do is to tell the difference in advance so we can make better decisions rather than better excuses. When we take things down to its essence, we make a decision. Should we do something? A company decides whether strategy is good or bad. That is, whether we should act or not act. And we do that by determining through whatever process we use whether act is better than don't act. If act is better, then act. If it is not, don't act. Simple, right? No. Simple, wrong. Something is missing, and I know that you know what it is. We are missing they, our competitors or other relevant others. And that's where we get into ADAM, the act, don't act matrix. Every consultant needs to have a 2x2 matrix, and this is mine. So we were missing they, and this here with ADAM gives us something that is a truer look at what may go on. Now this is the thing distilled down to its essence. There may be more rows, there may be many more rows, there may be more columns, there may be many more columns, and they can mean whoever or whatever is relevant: competitors, customers, regulators, suppliers, the economy, the weather. I know you know that. And I know that you know that going from 2 cells to 4 or more is the essence of business wargaming and scenario planning and strategy simulation. Thing is, 2 issues come up when we look at ADAM. First, there are potentially a lot of cells in that matrix. In my top pricer tournament, which is a relatively simple problem, I run billions of simulations. I mean, that's the kind of numbers we're talking about for how many cells there are. That is a lot more than best case, worst case, most likely case. but I know it can be done because I do it. Second, we need a model, not just a computer, because we need a model to know what calculations to be done. The computer doesn't know that until we tell the computer what to do. I know that can be done too, because I've done it. This is what a true positive looks like. If we look at, again, distilled down to the simplest possible version, if we act is always better than we don't act, no matter what they do, then that is a true positive. So it's that simple. Here's what a true positive looks like in the top pricer tournament. This is it's exactly the same format that we were just looking at. The numbers that we are seeing here come from calculations done by the top pricer tournament. This is based on a strategy that a real person chose. This person cared only about profitability. And what we see is that the row for we act has much higher numbers for the profit to sales ratio than the we don't act row. This is what a true positive looks like. A false positive is a bad strategy that looked good. It's a strategy where act is worse than don't act, no matter what they do. The reason that I say that it's about looking good is that people actually choose those strategies. If they saw the good and bad in that matrix, they would not choose them, but in some other way, the strategy looked good to them. So it looks like this in the top pricer tournament. This is a person who also cared only about profitability, also had exactly the same options available to him or her, and chose a strategy that clearly cut profitability by a lot. And these were, and when we compare this one to the prior one, they were done in the same scenarios, exactly the same scenarios. And our third one is it depends. And that's a strategy that, well, it depends. Whether we should act or not act depends on what they do. There are actually two ways that we could look at that. This is one of the two versions. The other is if you just flip it around, so that just flip it around. So what that looks like is something like this. And here's yet another person in the tournament who said, the only thing I care about is profitability. And if they don't act, then our strategy is a lousy idea. But if they do act, then it will help our performance to go up. So remember, for all three of those people, they chose their strategies thinking that they were good, but only some strategies turn out to be true positives. Some turn out to be false positives. Some turn out to be, it depends. But the thing is, this kind of analysis, this way of thinking like Adam, just organizing our thinking like that, helps us to see which strategies are good, not just who's the most persuasive. All three of the strategies we just saw were chosen by people who thought they were good, but the strategies differed wildly in their performance. We needed the analysis to be able to tell us which ones were good. This is possible also with quantitative business war games, where analysis helps us to resolve debates. I've got stories to tell about that. We don't have time for that now, sorry. We do. We're going to go on now to the third of our four reasons, yesterday versus otherwise. So imagine, think about the situation about a decade ago when we were in the midst of the financial crisis, the Great Recession. Should supermarkets cut prices in a recession? That's sort of relevant now also. So you might even put yourself in that position today. So imagine though that we are back in the recession, and it is clear that this is going across the economy, and the CEOs of major supermarket chains are trying to figure out What should we do with our prices? Now, the Wall Street Journal published an article that said that Safeway's CEO and SuperValue's CEO came up with different pricing strategies. Now, Safeway and SuperValue are two of the largest supermarket chains in the country. They may even be the two largest. I'm not 100% sure. But they are both enormous chains, and their CEOs were both experienced. They had tons of data available to them, and somehow they came up with different ideas for what they should do with regard to price. So it's remarkable that they tried different moves, and it's remarkable also that both of them, according to the article, were dissatisfied with the results that they got, and each of them effectively said, I wish I did what the other guy did. So how do we know who was right? Now, I know what you're going to say. Let's look at the results. Okay, let's start looking at some results. Here we've got shareholder return. 2009 is when the article came out. We can look also at 2010 shareholder return, see who got better. They started off in about the same place. SuperValue got much worse. Safeway got much better. And so it seems pretty clear that Safeway, whatever Safeway did was better than what SuperValue did. But I'm a little reluctant to pin the entire thing on just this one measure. So maybe we ought to look a little bit farther. So what we need is more data. Okay, great. Here's more data. Now we've got their sales, we've got their profits, we've got their Fortune 500 rank, and we have more information about what happened. We can see that SuperValue went down on some of the metrics. We can see Safeway went up, or at least held still. We can see that SuperValue is behind Safeway on profits, but they made a much larger improvement than Safeway did. So I don't know about you, but I'm not quite convinced yet as that for which one did better. But I'll bet that if we had more data, that would help us. So now we've got return on sales, return on assets, return on equity. We can see how they've made changes there. And in general, it looks like Safeway is doing better. In general, it looks like SuperValue is improving faster. And wow, we must be able to decide now, except I'm still not sure. This just doesn't look that clear to me. So maybe if we take a look at where they were in the past and let's see what their trajectory was, where was their momentum? Now we've got some idea of what their history was and how much progress they have made or they haven't made. Surely now we must be able to figure it out. Well, I can't. I think we need more data. There's more data. Now we can see 2 more years going into what happened after they made their price moves. We have here 6 years times 2 businesses times 7 metrics. We've got 84 numbers that we can look at. We've got knowledge that 3 times these companies have changed their CEOs. And I don't know about you, but I haven't got a clue which of these companies was doing better. But wait, it gets worse. In all of that, what we were doing was judging by looking at changes over time. Now, I'm going to abbreviate that idea by just calling it yesterday. But the key concept here is we did something and something got better or worse. We made some assumption about cause and effect, but we're not going to go there now. But the proper yardstick, I think, is not what changed versus yesterday. The proper yardstick is whether we made a good decision. Could we have done better? In other words, that's otherwise. GM's decline in yesterday terms was awful. I mean, they went way down to be more like Ford and Toyota. But in otherwise terms, it was not so clear. Preventing Toyota from growing was simply not an option for GM. The question is whether GM could have done better than they did, not whether GM could have stopped Toyota. Contrast that with, say, Sears. Sears could have been Walmart. It could have been Amazon. For that matter, it could have been Walmart and Amazon. But it chose not to. It chose just to sit back and watch. Now, the other issue here is that otherwise does not show up on any financial statements or market analysis. That's because otherwise didn't happen. And that's why we need to use Adam. But there's more. How many other decisions did those CEOs make? These are huge companies, Safeway and SuperValue. They're with massive numbers of stores selling massive numbers of products. To say one modest price decision is responsible for those 84 numbers we looked at, it's just plain silly. What about the other players? Their competitors, for example. What they do with their prices and the massive number of decisions that they make affects us. But we saw nothing about that in the tables that we looked at. What did they want? We looked at all those numbers, but many and perhaps all of them are irrelevant. And why? Because we didn't know what they wanted. Maybe they wanted to get shareholder return, but maybe they wanted to be a good neighbor during a crisis. Maybe they wanted to maintain employment. Maybe they wanted to beat the other one. Maybe they wanted to hold on to their executive jobs. Maybe they wanted to satisfy customers. Maybe they wanted to minimize disruption. We don't know. How can we, even with all those numbers, how can we judge their strategies if we don't know their goals? That's where we get to, this is my favorite phrase these days, the dubious clarity of the interpreted past. We have huge amounts of data with as many decimal points as we want, and we use it to make up stories. We make up stories, and we point to the numbers that we chose for our stories, and we believe our stories. The thing is, hindsight is not 2020. If it were 2020, why do we tell different stories about the same past? Fourth reason, in medicine, we do not have one doctor saying, you have an infection and you need an antibiotic, but another doctor says, no, you have a broken arm and you need a cast. That just doesn't happen in medicine. But in business, we have eminent gurus saying you need an antibiotic and other eminent gurus saying, you need a cast. We have no equivalent of the laws of physics. We have no laws of strategy yet. Let me illustrate. So what is this that's showing on the screen? I know what you're thinking. It's a picture. Well, you're right, it is. It's a picture of a desert. It's a picture of one of the driest regions of one of the driest places on Earth. This is the Atacama Desert in Chile. According to a study that Wikipedia had on the Atacama Desert, a study done by some British scientists, this place is so dry, the annual rainfall there is 0 for 120,000 years. My forecast, no, sorry about that. My forecast is that it will not rain there tomorrow. But one day, probably not tomorrow, but one day a drop of rain will fall on that part of the Atacama Desert and there will be a downpour of statistical activity. My forecast was wrong. I need better data. No, the day that drop falls will not show the data were wrong. They weren't. It will show the model was wrong if your model was simply to extrapolate a trend line into the future. Thing is, trends don't cause weather. Weather conditions cause weather. Trends don't cause profits. Profit conditions cause profits. Businesses tend to make decisions based on trends. We treat trends as though they have some kind of force. It's the oldest mistake in the book. It's mistaking correlation for causation. Trends work best in places like the Atacama Desert, where we can reasonably expect that the future is going to look like the past. But trends work worst when the future is going to look different or when we want to make the future different. Unfortunately, that's precisely when we need help the most. What we have without a science of strategy is a fixation on shiny objects and shiny companies. We benchmark them, excuse me, and we want to emulate them. Why? Sorry. because we assume that if we do what they did, we will get what they got. Emulate Toyota, don't emulate GM, even though they essentially did the same thing. I worked at the Strategic Planning Institute for 15 years, ending there as director of the Business Strategy Research Program. the SPI had put together a major database called the PIMS database, built on thousands of real businesses. For more information about that, if you're interested, look up a book called The PIMS Principles. There's much information about what is profitable to have, and we could figure that out pretty well using the PIMS database. There's much less information about how to get what is profitable to have. Big data does a great job at predicting the future if we expect the future to look just like the past, like forecasting the Atacama Desert, but that's not when we need help. There are endless anecdotes and secrets of success books out there, but they are based on the dubious clarity of the interpreted past. In other words, they are stories. Some of them may be true, but we don't know which ones. Developing the science of strategy is the fundamental problem that I focus on. And I've been at it, sometimes unknowingly, for decades. With my first serious simulator, I learned how to model competitive strategy problems. With my top pricer tournament, I learned how to simulate games. I'm making some progress combining strategy models and competitive games, so watch this space. Let's summarize the 4 reasons why businesses fail. First, competing is complex. We simply cannot do the arithmetic in our heads. Second, competing is not the same thing as managing. Managing inherently seeks certainty. It focuses internally, and it's sort of machine-like. Competing is inherently uncertain, externally focused, and game-like. Both are necessary. Competing cannot be sure. That's just the nature of games. But competing well improves our odds, and that is a big deal, even if we can't be sure. The definition of a good decision is that it's one that improves the odds. Only a few percentage points separate the casino from the gambler, but that's how the casino makes billions. Okay, we're going to switch into part 2 here, learning from the top pricer tournament. We'll talk about strategies, confidence, and it depends. And you can enter the top pricer tournament if you like. It's free for individuals, it's non-commercial, it's confidential, and you'll get a report that shows how your strategies performed. You will also be supporting my research, for which I thank you. Just contact me and you can enter the tournament. It's really cool stuff. And by the way, even though it is the top pricer tournament, we could apply the same thinking to a top marketing tournament, the top Salesforce tournament, the top product features tournament, and so on. So just so you have an idea of the scale of this thing, the top pricer tournament, so far 2,002 people have entered strategies from around the world. They are executives, managers, consultants, students, and professors. The tournament runs, so when you think about game theory, you usually think about something that looks like the prisoner's dilemma, which is 2 players. The top pricer tournament uses a 3-player game, which adds significant complexity, also significant realism, because we often have more than one other competitor. So what the tournament does is it runs every strategy against all the other combinations of strategies from the other people who have entered the tournament. And if you do a bunch of tedious arithmetic, what you find out is that the tournament, with the number of entrants we have so far, simulates about 12 billion scenarios, 12 billion simulations. It is not an Excel spreadsheet. It took me about a year and hundreds of pages of code to write it, and it is growing. Something that we see from the top pricer tournament is that true positives outnumber false positives 1.7 to 1. So you want to make the case for competitive intelligence, here's some help. Telling the difference between true positives and false positives depends on knowing something about what competitors want. Know anybody who can help there? That means you. That case is especially powerful for the 1/3 of strategies that are it depends strategies. That requires knowing something about competitors before you can make a good decision. Now, there's still more work to do, and we can go deeper into this than we have time for. And this finding is new. I have not yet reported it in anything that I've published, but sooner or later it will show up someplace. I looked for, one of the things that I asked people who went through the tournament is, how confident are you that your strategies are going to perform well? And people could just say, I was very confident, somewhat confident, or not at all confident. And what we see here is that overall performance in the 3 generic industries in the tournament has very little connection to confidence. So this is why I said before that confidence is not CI's friend, or anybody else's friend for that matter. Whether a person is confident or unsure tells us little or nothing about how that person's strategies will perform in the top riser tournament. There is something that does correlate to outcomes, and that is the amount of time that people spend coming up with their strategies. And it makes sense. If you think about a problem longer, you're more likely to make a good decision. So we see that there is a connection between how much time people spend coming up with their strategies and how their strategies perform in the top riser tournament. In fact, this so far is the only demographic style or conventional style metric that does correlate with outcomes in the tournament. Things that do not make a difference: gender, age, or which is correlated with experience, by the way, Myers-Briggs profiles, the continent that a person grew up on, whether you have a business degree. So far, those things just do not correlate very much to outcomes. One of the things that I did a little research on in the tournament was this question of, should we bet on the wisdom of the crowd or on the lonely genius when we choose our strategies? On the one hand, we want the comfort, or the plausible deniability, if you prefer, of saying that we were in consensus. Hey, it wasn't my fault. I mean, everybody thought that it was a great idea. But we want there to be consensus, that we feel confident that we've come up to a good decision. On the other hand, it is also true that we venerate the lonely genius, the person who just rides in and says, I've got a great idea. Nobody has ever thought about this before. And that's what we want. We want this kind of blue ocean thinking, which works best. In the top riser tournament, I was able to address this to some degree because some strategies were chosen by many people, dozens of people. Other strategies were chosen by only 1 or 2, which generally performed better. It turns out that if the only thing that you know about a strategy is that it is a crowd strategy, multiple people chose it, you should choose that strategy. On average, the crowd strategies outperformed the lonely genius strategies. We can look at that from the other perspective. On average, the lonely geniuses are really losers, not just loners. Most of the lonely genius strategies turned out to be pretty bad. However, the very best strategies turned out to be loner strategies. And if you think about that for a moment, it really has to be that way. Because if you want to beat the crowd, you must do something the crowd isn't doing. So if you are doing a crowd strategy, how are you going to outperform the crowd? Notice that there is an asterisk there. Here's the asterisk. The corollary is, if you cannot do something the crowd isn't doing, do not expect to beat the crowd. that is the GM thing that we talked about earlier with the convergence of competitors. I've got some ongoing research happening here about is there a best strategy? This turns out to be an interesting and difficult problem. Now, it's easy to have the computer find the best strategy against specific competitor strategies. That's a straightforward search. I can do that, no problem. But your competitors are searching too for their best strategy. So if you switch to your best strategy, they may be switching to theirs, and that gets to be very complex. In effect, that is a search for a Nash equilibrium. And so for each of the three, what we want to do is to start off with the selected strategy that they began with, and then search for the best to switch to, and then resimulate and resimulate and resimulate. Now the code works, but the results are not exactly conclusive yet. And there's some circumstances the code does find an equilibrium, and it finds it fast, just a few resimulations, but it's not necessarily an equilibrium that makes anybody happy. Sometimes there is a very long route where performance goes up and down for you and for your competitors, and it may become an infinite loop after 1,000 or 2,000 switches of strategy. That suggests that we may be doomed to this sort of volatility that there's just nothing that we can do about. I guess, as I said, this is something I'm just starting to get into. If you have any thoughts on the subject or opinions or experience or know of any other kind of research, I would love to talk with you. Okay, let's talk now about 3 ways to raise your odds of success. And we're going to start off with listening. At one level, that means paying attention to disconfirming evidence and even seeking disconfirming evidence. Now, to CI professionals, that's second nature. You guys are devoted to critical thinking, and I don't need to tell you about that. We know that we can find disconfirming evidence via scenarios, intelligence gathering, wargaming, shadow teams, all that kind of stuff. The value of disconfirming evidence can sometimes even be quantified. I have seen quantitative business war games produce value literally thousands of times the cost of the war game. If you'd like to learn more about that, look at the book Wharton on Dynamic Competitive Strategy. I co-authored one of the chapters in that book, and there is a story about Shell Oil that displays what I'm talking about here with the value. But let's go a little deeper here too. There are workshops on storytelling. That is, it's not just blah, 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 or in this case, bah, bah, bah. Hey, give me a break. I worked a long time on that joke. Telling stories well helps people to understand, remember, and to feel motivated. What is the opposite of storytelling? Story listening. Colleagues, customers, competitors, partners, suppliers, distributors, etc. don't communicate just information. They also tell stories all the time. Are you listening? Listen for phrases like first mover advantage or emulate shiny companies or fine tune the strategy. That tells you something about how they decide and what they think works. Listen for how people frame the problem that they are facing. Frame the problem that we must solve. Do they see it as our costs too high, or do they see it as our prices too low? Listen for assumptions that competitors are enemies, or they're asleep, or they're distracted, or they're coasting. Story listening is part of your personal competitive advantage, not just your company's. So listen not only for what they decide, but also for how they decide. How they decide can give you a clue for how they will respond to your move. Going back to those it depends strategies, it will help you there. Lead, that's the second one here. Now, lead has all sorts of connotations about being first, being biggest, being in command, stuff like that. Let's think about the opposite of leading, and that is being unpredictable. You cannot lead while being unpredictable. And one of the strategy options in the top pricer tournament is a strategy called Be Unpredictable. Now, with that option, the simulation randomly cuts, holds, or raises your price in each quarter. That's about as unpredictable as you can get. There are 3 points in the tournament where you can select Be Unpredictable. So that means that you are never, that's 0 choices of unpredictable, sometimes 1 choice, often or always unpredictable, picking it all 3 times. Being unpredictable clearly results in lower performance in the top pricer, at least in the top pricer tournament. The thing is, you cannot lead while being unpredictable. There is no trust, there's no signal, there's no vision. And when you are unpredictable, what exactly is your strategy? See what happens, and then what? Now, this is something that I discovered from the top pricer tournament. I'm not suggesting that you apply that in your business. The tournament is a specific situation. I'm not giving you strategy advice here. The consequences might be different in different situations. All I can say here is that there is at least some evidence that being unpredictable does not work, even though a lot of people tout unpredictability. And that is the point that I want to make. Do not assume that it's a good idea. That means also do not assume that you should hide your strategy, because hiding your strategy is similar to being unpredictable. Number 3, wonder. Let's go back to thinking about the 14th century European. Is it cognitive bias to believe the sun orbits the earth? And we said, no, it isn't, because it was, at that time, it was reasonable for people to believe that the earth is the center of all things and the sun orbits the earth. Everybody knew that. Now, I want to ask you to imagine that you are a 21st century executive. Is it cognitive bias to believe businesses orbit their budgets and goals? If we don't hit the budget or goal, we say it is the fault of the manager and not of the game called managing. It doesn't feel like cognitive bias because we, like those who believe the earth was the center of all things, see budgets and goals as the center of all things. To what we know, that ain't so. The game of managing is not bad, evil, or wrong. It is incomplete, though, because it does not include the game of competing. The game of competing is also not bad, evil, or wrong, and it also is incomplete. We know we need both because each contains truth that the other does not. But the game of competing is far less developed and, frankly, far less powerful in the sense of having influence than the game of managing. We are a master of business administration, not master of business competition. If you want to do something the crowd isn't doing, you must first think something the crowd isn't thinking. Simple advice. Notice that thinking something the crowd isn't thinking is not merely about a new product feature or about being the first to jump onto a trending digital platform. Thinking something the crowd isn't thinking extends to what you think about, to how you see the worlds of managing and competing, and to how you make and judge decisions. Now, we have covered a great deal of material with unfamiliar and even heretical ideas, and we've gone at breakneck speed. Anybody who would like to talk more, please get in touch with me. And that, again, that includes entering the top pricer tournament. Here's how I would like to sum up. We cannot be sure, but being sure is not the goal. We are not helpless. We understand key concepts such as competitive advantage, cost structure, market segmentation, and so on, even if we do not have a widely accepted way to quantify them and to simulate them to make competitive strategy decisions. And we can make better decisions and achieve better outcomes. What we need is the honesty to say out loud, I am not sure, and to take time to learn. What we need is the humility to say, I might be wrong, and to explore something else. That is how we think something the crowd isn't thinking. That is competitive advantage. And with that, I'll say, be safe and be well. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, for this. And I think we've learned a lot. Before we get to Q&As, we are towards the top of the hour now, so I know some of you have to leave to your next appointments, and so what we'll do is we'll continue recording into the next hour to take some Q&As. So you can find some of those in the recordings when they're released. But I do want to mention that coming up, we have the CI 2020 Virtual Summit Series launch with the topic of the future of CI from 2020 to what's next. And that's coming up on September 15th to 16th, as you've heard me announce in previous webinars. And you can find out more at cifellows.com and go into the events section of the menu bar, or there's also the bit.ly link there. And I just want to mention that registration is open as of today. So please check it out. You can see the program there as well, the summit agenda, and we look forward to seeing you there. So there will not be a September webinar because we will be focusing our energy on producing this for you, and we'll see you in terms of our monthly webinars in October. And with this, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and I want to thank Mark Chussil, and you'll find his contact information here, and you can also connect with him on LinkedIn. As you can see, there's his LinkedIn profile address, and the email address for the Top Pricer tournament is right there in orange, and so please feel free, you can take a screenshot of this or catch us on the recording, but you can contribute to Mark's research and into the body of knowledge that he continues to share with us in strategy. So thank you so much, Mark, for this. And at this point, we can open things up for Q&A. I do see that we have some folks, let's see, that are posing a question. So we've got Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne. Yvonne says, your opinion of the shiny company, Tesla. Thank you. Good presentation. So what are your thoughts about Tesla, Mark?
What are my thoughts about Tesla? Well, I'd like to have one. I think that they're pretty cool. I think the company. Yeah, I think Tesla as a company is fascinating because of the way that it is going so deeply into its field and so aggressively. It's not tiptoeing in. I think that they've done that. I think that they've done that well. I think that they're clearly a huge force to be reckoned with. But I'm just sort of saying platitudes there. I'm not quite sure what the question means from a perspective of what specifically are you talking about. By the way, I don't know where that phone number came from. That's on the
I'm
slide.
so sorry.
That's not
number.
That's not my number.
Oh, so sorry about that. That must have been left over. So let me make a correction here. That is not Mark's phone number. You'll be calling somebody else altogether. So I apologize for that. It should just be the email address and the LinkedIn address. Yeah, and so maybe your thoughts then about Elon Musk's approach about strategy as we understand it, right, from afar.
This is one of those areas where it's easy to make up stories. And so I tend to resist doing that. One thing that I think that Elon Musk has done very well is that he's recognized that it is not going to be easy to be in the automobile industry starting off by tiptoeing into the market. So he has gone in big time, and I think that that was required. So as far as I can tell, he has an internally consistent business model and internally consistent strategy. And he's come up and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And Mark, I also have a question too. You talked about listening, you talked about, crowdsourcing, as well as reading conditions and the importance of all of that, towards good decision making. Perspectives is important as well. But with that, there seems to be endless potential variables and so forth for managing inputs. So do you have suggestions for good decision makers, good managers, to frame these inputs, or to perhaps have certain filters, for example, so that these techniques become more manageable, as opposed to opening up a fire hose of inputs and perspectives for decision making?
That is a great question. We could talk for hours about that. First, as far as the fire hose is concerned, let's keep in mind that we already have a whole bunch of fire hoses going on in our companies, and we don't regard them as fire hoses. We regard them as necessary. And I think that if we were, as we get closer to a science of strategy, we won't see it as a fire hose. We will see it as necessary information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think that your question is especially insightful from the perspective that if we get too detailed, then we get lost. It's, in my experience working with companies, trying to either put together simulation models for them or business war games for them. Mm-hmm. They will get very detailed about all of the nuances of their products. For example, we have these 70 things that are special about our product, and our competitors have these 34 things where they've got some kind of an advantage or whatever. And that is trying to gauge the health of a tree by looking at a single leaf. What we need to do is to generalize into a key concept, which in the case of product features is differentiation. How well differentiated are you from your competition? You may have superior differentiation on one feature, inferior differentiation on another feature, but on average, you may be average. Which is what the thing was going on with GM, Ford, and Toyota. They're a little bit different, but not enough to make much of a difference. So when we think in terms of, if we say, okay, so all these things we're talking about, we're really talking about differentiation, or that we're talking about cost structures, or we're talking about speed of reaction, or those kinds of things, or how long we think it's going to take for customers to react, or how we segment markets. When we have those higher level abstractions, like perceived quality and differentiation, that's when we can get into the science of strategy, and where we can say, how differentiated are we right now? And let's not limit ourselves to these very specific things that we already differentiate on. Let's open it up to where else can we differentiate, or where else can our competitors differentiate against us?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we have the question from a fellow, Cliff Kalb. He says, thank you, Mark. Do you believe that competitive strategy is sustainable, or has a strategy of being nimble and constantly shifting strategy may be more successful in the long run?
Also a great question. This may get me thrown out of the competitive strategist union, but I will say that I think there is no such thing as a sustainable strategy, because nothing lasts forever, and it is a trap that we can think that, well, our strategy is sustainable, we're done, we don't have to think about it anymore. At the same time, I think also that the idea of moving really, really fast and constantly, that also is potentially dangerous. That's how price wars can get started. I have heard people say um, that we don't know why our competitors got so upset when we cut our prices. It wasn't a strategic price cut, it was just a tactical price cut. That is actually what they said. Um, Customer doesn't know any difference between a strategic price cut and a tactical price cut. They don't pay a strategic price or a tactical price. They pay a price. And it's reasonable for the competitor to respond to that. In managing, one of the things that we feel obliged to do is that whenever there is some kind of a stimulus, we must respond to it. And it feels virtuous. It feels like I saw something and I did something. I am responsible. But it is possible also to make things a lot worse. But being able to tell the difference is like what we were talking about before. How can you tell the difference between a true positive and a false positive?
Terrific. Thank you. We also have a couple of other questions that have rolled in too in the meantime. So we have Janhavi Raja asks, how long would you say, in your experience, is it good to strategize before starting off a business in a developing market? And what all should one think about, look at from the perspective of competitive strategy, business, PR, and growth consulting for small to medium-sized enterprises?
Okay, so you're asking, it's a question about growth strategies for a business.
Yeah, and how long would you say is it good to strategize before starting off a business in a developing market? So a lot of unknowns there. Question.
I don't think that we can say that you should strategize for 7 days and 12 minutes. We don't know. Strategize until the job is done. Mm-hmm. And that means making sure that the strategy that you come up with is internally consistent, that it can survive a business war game with your own people trying to poke holes in it. That's the looking for disconfirming evidence that we were talking about before. And you have to be really, strategy in a sense never stops because the world doesn't stop. So when something happens, yes, you should pay attention. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should do something, but it certainly does mean that you should pay attention. How much does this thing matter to us? And how much does it matter to other people in the market? Because if they respond, should we be prepared to respond? Thinking about strategy in that kind of gaming term, that gaming paradigm is fundamentally different from thinking about it in the managing paradigm. And it's something that we should stay always vigilant about. And the more that we can think in advance about this is what our business is truly based on. These are the things that are the pillar of our differentiation, of our competitive advantage, of our business model, of the reasons why customers buy from us. If we see those things being threatened, then we should pay attention to them now. If we see minor things going on, and if we truly don't believe that they are not going to threaten the core of our business, well, treat it a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Thank you for that. And Sharon Storger asks, what role does customer behavior play in the strategy? How should we factor it into our decision-making practices?
That is also a great question. Customer behavior is absolutely essential to understand. In a managing perspective, what we tend to do is we forecast customer demand, which reduces customers to trend lines. But what the question was asking is about customer behavior, because customers, they don't buy according to trend lines. We don't, none of us says, I'm going to buy 2.3% more of this product this year than I did last year. We make purchase decisions. And so understanding customer behavior is absolutely essential for that. That can be a whole bunch of things. It can be, do customer preferences change? That affects our perceived differentiation. Even if nothing else changes in the market, if the things that they care about change, that by itself can change our differentiation. Our customers how long does it take for customers to become aware of of a change in the market? In the automobile industry, for instance, we typically don't care so much about what's going on in the automobile industry for years at a time, because we don't buy a car every year or every day or something. But with other things, our purchase frequencies are much faster and we may be much more attuned. So yeah, we have to watch customer behavior.
Great, thank you. And we have a question from Richard Caldwell, who, by the way, is also one of our presenters at the upcoming CI 2020 Summit. And he asks, should you have a range of strategies ready to implement if the market shifts? Sort of the outputs from scenario analysis. Sort of the outputs from scenario analysts.
That is also, you guys ask terrific questions.
Good crowd.
It's a great crowd. And you guys are helping me too, just with the questions that you're asking. So thank you for that. And yeah, that's also a great question. If you can have contingency plans, I think that's wise. In most cases, I'd be happy if a company will come up with just one good strategy. If they can come up with multiple ones, and especially to know which ones to go to, that would be terrific. And think about it from a leadership perspective. If you do have contingency plans like that, you can use that to sort of communicate or signal to the market, this by saying, we think that this is the way that the market ought to be going, but if people do something that we think is going to be really negative, we are prepared to respond. Mm-hmm. Only do that, of course, if you really are prepared to respond. So it's got to be something credible, but that is good. And the other thing about the alternative strategies is that a benefit of looking for alternative strategies is that you may find one you like more than the one that you think is your current strategy.
Right. And that also helps you from getting locked in, right? You're talking about biases.
Yeah.
And I would say too,
it's being mentally agile.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And the exercise of having alternative strategies and the existence of alternative strategies, wouldn't you say also helps us monitor changes through early warning in ways that one strategy is too limiting, right? It just does not allow us to see from the perspectives of having other strategies in play.
That's a great point. What would make us change? Answering the question, what would make us change from strategy A to strategy B?
Yeah, excellent. And I'm going to round things off here by asking a rather broad question that it just seems perennial nowadays. So when we're talking about strategy, traditionally it's really been a human endeavor. When we're talking about basically human leaders and their supporters, looking at the landscape, looking at their needs, et cetera, coming up with a strategic decision. And nowadays, of course, you've got your simulation program, and others are beginning to use artificial intelligence tools to enable this. And so, can you just speak generally on how you envision this to support strategic decision making, and perhaps address some of these issues of certainty and uncertainty, thinking from the fire hose, and just basically helping us implement some of the tips that you've recommended in this presentation?
Yeah, you've touched on a subject that is very close to my heart.
Same here.
And actually, oh, it's so much fun.
I know, we're geeking out.
I've been doing some writing and also some presenting on what I call cyborg strategy.
Mhm.
And to me, cyborg strategy is, there are some things that a human being can do that a computer cannot yet do. And that is to frame problems and to think about, just what do we want, and to have imagination. There are, on the other hand, there's things that a computer can do that human beings can't. A computer can calculate many orders of magnitude faster than we can. It's impartial and it's precise. It is not a question, I think, of whether we should use computers or humans. I think that it is clear that it needs to be the combination. In my own top pricer tournament, I have been stunned at what the tournament has shown to be good strategies. I know that they are things I never would have come up with myself. In fact, they were so startling to me, I thought there had to be a bug in the software. So I went through it and I traced it through, and then I thought more about it and had, those slap the forehead kinds of moments. And it was like, this makes total sense, but I never would have come up with that by myself. And I think that there has to be a combination. The problem is not with humans' lack of imagination. The problem is that humans have not yet come up with the right model to put into the cyborg strategy, so that we can calculate the right things. The top pricer tournament is a step in that direction. And I think, I'm sorry, this sounds like a commercial for me, but I'm proud of the work that I do. And the work that I've done in simulation, I think is definitely a step in the right direction for the kind of model that we need. Other people may be doing something similar, but I like my tools.
It's a challenge of the models, and it's also a challenge too of the data, right? Having enough data, having the right data as
Actually,
well.
not so much.
So I'm sorry?
Not so much.
So please elaborate on that.
Yeah, because what if we're getting, this is what we were talking about before with the idea of, if we try to measure differentiation on scores of different things, well, my product is different from yours on this thing. We offer 12 sizes and you only offer 11 sizes, and that sort of thing. If we can abstract it a little bit and say, how differentiated are we? How much does the customer care about that? Those are things that we can measure. I know that because I have measured them. And I know that this can be done because I have done this work with companies. It does take a fair number of variables, but not as many as we fear, because we don't require the kind of precision that we would need for accounting, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We can never be sure. This is not an issue of precision. It is an issue of decisions. And in my experience, what I have seen is that strategies end up with very different results, way outside the range of sensitivity analysis, and using things that can be measured. I've also seen it happen with that when I've asked companies to measure some stuff, well, they may not be 100% confident, but it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the stakes are so high. The right question is not, can we get enough data? The right question is, how much is it worth to us to get a better decision? And with that, I think there's simply no question about the value of doing that work.
Interesting. I feel like we can dive into so many more questions surrounding this topic. So perhaps this could be a future webinar, is just to talk about, you know, the relationship between technology, you know, and our strategic practices. And maybe we'll cap this off by my asking. So you just mentioned decision thresholds. What are your thoughts about decision thresholds? And you know, Jeff Bezos, for example, is famous for having one, right? So, you know, do you have any research on that? Do you have any feelings, thoughts, opinions about people who use decision thresholds, and perhaps perspectives on how well they work?
I don't have any real thoughts about that. I tend to be a little leery of things that are magic numbers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also recognize that it can be handy. If we value speed, it can be handy.
Mm-hmm.
What I tend to focus on is I want to know whether in the kind of work that I do in strategy work, it usually ends up being something like, is this strategy better than that strategy? Mm-hmm. And rather than something hitting a particular threshold.
Yeah, yeah, good thoughts. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I think you know, we've had a good number of people stick around for this Q&A, and and I know others will be listening to this on the recording. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your research and your thoughts with us. And I also want to finally post the correct contact information on the screen here. And so for folks, you know, to reach out to Mark via email, via LinkedIn, and also the Top Pricer Strategy email is there as well. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks for these wonderful questions. And Mark, thank you very much for sharing your work. And everybody stay safe. We'll stop the recording now. And then, you know, folks who want to stick around and chat for the after party that we often have, we can certainly do that. So thank you very much.